welcome everybody to another evening with the Rhinebeck Historical Society. We're delighted to have as our speaker this evening Neil Murray. Neil is a teacher, has been for quite a few years in the Pine Plains School District right next door to ours. In fact, he lives in Clinton and his children attend school in the Rhinebeck School District at Chancellor. But he does teach in Pine Plains, teaches, as you would expect, American history. He's also a teacher of a course there in military history. I think it's probably the only high school in the county that has such a program. I'd love to sign up for that myself. The Living History Foundation that he's involved with is an organization that instructs people at the graduate level, and he's involved in teaching military history sponsored by the Living History Foundation as well. Neil, as you would expect, is also a reenactor. Told me a few moments ago that he just spent some time up in Ticonderoga, where, again, as you would expect, it was about 5 degrees below zero. He was out there in his snowshoes reenacting what things were like in 1758 up there at the northern edge of the colony of New York, as it would have been at the time, apparently enjoying that immensely. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to share with you and introduce Neil J. Murray Jr., who's going to talk to us about things from the Revolutionary War period. Neil?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for having me this evening. So what I like to do with my programs is not necessarily talk about the generals and the great battles, but kind of get to the nuts and bolts of the soldier and discuss their material culture. What were they wearing, what were they carrying, and how they used that equipment. And once you have an understanding on that kind of ground level, then really the generals and the battles come into focus much better than if you simply focus on them. So during the program, please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to stop me and ask. And we'll start with what I'm wearing right here. The uniform that I am wearing today is about the year 1777. And everything that I have, these are all reproductions, but they are authentic reproductions. Many of the items have been copied from originals in collections, at private collections from friends of mine, and some of the collections up at places like Fort Ticonderoga, where I'm involved with some of the interpretive staff up there that are personal friends of mine. So starting with the shirt, this is a linen shirt, and it's referred to typically as a check shirt. And if you notice, there's kind of a little bit of a small checker pattern on it. And this would have been a very common shirt. So if I was an officer, I would be wearing a white shirt. But I'm dressed today as just a common citizen. And a lot of the clothes that you're going to see, and when we discuss some of the militia clothing, it's civilian clothing. So really you have a blend of civilian clothing and military clothing as you kind of move forward, as we were beginning to form kind of a professional army. As I was discussing with my students just today, as a matter of fact, when you move into the War of 1812, what they remarked, which I thought was really good observation, was that looks like a real military uniform. And we even see a lot of that today. If you see the cadets on parade at West Point, it looks very similar to a War of 1812 uniform. Here we have a blend, a lot of civilian things, and then maybe a military coat on top. So I know David asked that to relate it to Rhinebeck citizens and Rhinebeck residents, those that would have been in the Dutchess County Militia would have been dressed identical, aside from the military coat that we'll take a look at a little bit later in the program. So this is a check shirt made out of linen. Linen comes from a plant, flax. And flax would have been harvested and woven into cloth and sewn into shirts like this. Now, these shirts are a little bit different than obviously the shirts that everybody wears today. And one thing that you can notice is the seam here sits off my shoulder as opposed to up kind of where we would expect a modern seam. The shirt is very long, and it's kind of stuffed and tucked into my pants. And if I had my pants down, it would come down to about my knee. So it serves as kind of the shirt and your undergarments. Over the top, this is called a waistcoat. This waistcoat was actually copied from an original that a colleague of mine had, and I was able to put on the original to kind of size this up, and this is a copy of that. And everything I'm wearing is hand sewn, and on this one in particular, you can see a little bit of the hand stitching on the inside of the waistcoat. They were to fit tight, so as you can see, this is very snug, very snug. These are pewter buttons, and the style of the waistcoat continues to rise as you move from the French and Indian War, so about the 1750s, 1760s, 1770s, now we're in the late 1770s here, and as you can notice, the waistcoat is coming up very high. As we move into really the late Revolution, into the War of 1812, they are square cut, and they come up even higher. So this is called a waistcoat. On my legs, these are breeches made out of linen. This waistcoat is wool. These are called breeches, and they simply just come down to your knee. They're supposed to fit nice and tight. Nothing's baggy. Everything was kind of form-fitting. And as you progress again through the American Revolution, there's a shift from breeches to what they called overalls, which are similar to pants. And students always ask me, well, why do they call them overalls? Well, because they went over all of your leg. Well, isn't that what pants do? Well, pants didn't really exist before this time. Now they go over all of your leg, overalls. But I'm wearing breeches, 1777, and these again are made out of linen. Stockings, they come all the way up, and again they're kind of stuffed in my pants. If I pull them all the way up, they'd come about mid-thigh, and they would have been hand knit, but not a tube. They would make them flat and then sew them in the back. So I'll try and do a little bit of a balancing act, and maybe some of you might be able to see the seam that runs up the stockings.
Yeah.
Right, so they would have been sewn flat and then stitched together coming up that way. On my feet, and I'll hold up another pair so I don't have to do a balancing act, are rough out or common shoes. Leather has a rough side and a smooth side, so here you can see the rough side is out. So these are the shoes of an enlisted soldier. An officer's shoes are going to have the smooth side of the leather out. Looks nicer, and they're probably not walking through the mud and the dirt like the common soldier is. So the rough side of the leather being out serves a number of purposes. One, the smooth side is a little more comfortable on your feet. And then secondly, as you're walking through mud and dirt and scratching up against things, it doesn't show the wear as much. Right? Buckles, so brass buckles, hold them on your feet, so there's no laces. And they are made with what's called a straight last. So there's no right shoe and there's no left shoe. They're both the same. So when I hold this one up, you can kind of see how it just has just a straight shape. It doesn't turn. Those shoes did exist, but they called them crooked shoes as opposed to straight. You know, and I know oftentimes I'm asked, well, why do they do that? It's cheap. They're all the same, all the same. And I've never found any documentation on this. I don't know if it's folklore or not, but there's kind of a common, I don't want to say myth, but perception that if you wore your shoes on one foot and they're straight, and you started to wear, and you can see how I walk kind of funny, that if you put it on the other foot, then they would last longer because then it would wear out the other side. I have heard that all over. I personally, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, have never found any soldier write in a journal that that's what they did. And a lot of the research that I do and a lot of the things that I carry in reenactments and in a lot of my talks is all based on primary source documents. So either a copy of an original, a journal entry that I read. I've never come across that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And here's why I personally don't think it exists. Even though they're straight, when you start wearing it on one foot, what starts to happen, the bottom doesn't change shape, but the top leather starts to wear, and you're actually making them a little bit more comfortable. So when you start off, they're not comfortable, but as the leather breaks in, you really do have a right and a left shoe, even though they're straight. So that's a little bit about what's on my person right here. Let's take a look at some of the other garments here. And what I'll do is I'll focus first on the militia, the civilian. And again, this would have been very typical of a Rhinebeck resident serving in the Dutchess County Militia, turning out for military service in their civilian clothing. Really no different than you are wearing what you're wearing right now, and then you go into your cabinet and get the shotgun that you used for deer season, and then you turn out for military service. That's really what these guys were doing, which is pretty amazing. This is a civilian cocked hat. It would have been hand blocked. So you start off with a flat piece of wool felt, and it would have been hand formed. And this one has what's called a fantail. So if you notice, the back of the hat stands up a little bit higher than the front. All right, so just a little bit of a fancier civilian hat, but still nothing too crazy. I'm dressed about as a middle of the road, middle class citizen. Has a little bit of lace for decoration, and then just a little button there. And that's actually an original button. So I guess I do have one original piece with me. That's an original button. Now the way you would wear the hat, the cock of the hat goes over your left eye, and that's really stylish. But it also would have been a way that when you are carrying your musket, when I pick up a musket or a fowler, which is a civilian hunting weapon, you'll see why the hat has to be worn off to the side. So a civilian style cocked hat. I'm going to show you a military cocked hat in a little bit, which will be a little different. I brought two civilian coats to show you. And these are both handmade. Both of these are copies of originals that are in the collection at Ticonderoga. First one, this scarlet colored, madder red. Scarlet would have been significantly brighter. This is kind of an orangish red, which was just a lot cheaper to produce in terms of the dye of the wool. So this one in particular has pewter buttons, has similar cuffs to the military style, so take a look at those cuffs, and then I'll show you another coat that I'll put on, which will be a little bit different. And these would have fit very tight. On the back, it has pleats. And those buttons there are just for decoration, So this would have been, again, a civilian's coat. So imagine somebody walking down the street in Rhinebeck in 1777, civilian. They would have had a hat like this and a coat very similar. Now this coat, sorry, is there a question?
Yeah, that looks like it's a wool felt. It's not.
This is wool.
But it's a wool felt.
No, this is straight wool. Yeah, this is straight wool. It's called broadcloth.
Yeah, but is it? I'll look at it close.
Okay. Yeah. The wool they would have used, if you notice, the wool on this waistcoat is a little bit different. This is more of a flannel wool. That's what's called broadcloth, which is a cheaply produced wool. This is wool felt.
How did they produce that, by the way, if I can ask?
They would have had looms.
Yeah.
They would have had looms. A lot of the wool would have been imported. Some of it would have been made in the colonies. And the exact width of the loom, off the top of my head, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank. But if you look at some of the original blankets, they were sewn up the middle. Because ballparking about that wide, that's it. So if you want a blanket wider than that, you make two of these and sew them up the middle. All right. This is another coat. And I'll talk about some features and then I'll put this one on. This has what's called sailor's cuffs. So the cuffs are a little bit different. So a little more decorative, a little bit fancier. The buttonholes are done with a different color, linen thread. So it gives it a little bit of a decoration. If this was an officer's coat or a wealthy individual's coat, they would have used silver. It would have been a silver thread that they would have used here. This is just a white linen. The buttons on this coat are cloth covered. So that's a wooden blank with wool over the top. And I'll put this one on for you. And as I'm putting it on, you can see how tight it's going to fit. The buttons on the bottom and the buttonholes on the bottom are false. They are just for decoration. So only the top two buttons are going to close. Usually you leave the top button open, and then I'll button these two here. That's right. There you go. So notice how tight it fits.
Can't gain any weight.
That's right. So again, a civilian coat. It does have pleats in the back, very similar to the other coat that I showed you. So again, typical civilian outfit. Now, there's one piece that may seem military, but believe it or not, is civilian as well, and that's your sword.
Are the pockets real or is it?
Pockets are real, yes ma'am. Oh, excuse me, lady, I reached in the wrong one. Again, here, you go to the tailor. Excuse me, tailor, how can I save some money? Well, sir, one false pocket, one real pocket. Yeah. And you can't tell if you're looking at it. Right. This is a civilian sword. It's called a hunting sword. And I'll put that on. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So your hunting sword would be worn on your left side. And even if you are a civilian and you're going to go walking down the street, right here in Rhinebeck, you're going to have your sword with you. It's just a status symbol. It showed you had a little bit of money. It was similar to wearing a coat or wearing a hat. And they called them hunting swords because, believe it or not, they were used for hunting. Now, during this period of time, poor people hunt deer. Okay, if you had a little bit of money, so I'm depicting a little bit of a middle-class citizen, you're going to hunt fox. And if you take your shot on the fox and you wound the animal and it is not dead, you're not going to reload hunting sword, right? A lot of the blades would have been imported from England. In this case, this is a copy of one of those. So the blade itself would have been imported, and then the handle, the hilt, would have been fixed here in the colonies. It's a very short blade, right? It's not sharp at all, but obviously it can be used for stabbing. But as we take a look at another sword, as we look a little bit more at some of the military dress, these would sometimes be used as blunt instruments. However, if I hit you with this, I'm going to take you out, but then this is probably going to be broken as well. So even in a combat kind of role, the militia were required to have a sidearm. And typical sidearm of a civilian, middle to a little bit of the upper class, is going to be a sword just like that. The belt that it's on is just a leather belt, and it might be hard to see from the back, but this one has a little bit of a pressed checker design on it as well, which would have been another upgrade. I mean, think of it like you're going to buy a car. Do you want the navigation system or do you not want the navigation system? I wanted the navigation system, so I have a little bit fancier of a belt. When we look at kind of a standard military issued belt, it's not going to be fancy, and it's also not going to be kind of this black, it'll be a plain leather color. So that's kind of worn on the side like that. So if you were to turn out for militia duty, and forming up right near the Beekman Arms, that was a great book, by the way, I read that book that was recently written on the Beekman Arms, you would be expected to turn out with the following gear. So civilian dress, now I need to add some civilian items that I would be able to serve in the military with. So, if we're going to go out on campaign, first thing I'm going to need to bring is my canteen. So this is a wooden canteen, also a copy of an original, and these were called cheese box canteens. Looks a little bit like a cheese box. Those would have been hand-forged nails that are put in the top of the canteen. This is a hemp strap with leather fasteners or keepers. And the soldiers usually would have engraved their initials on it. So if you notice, I carved my initials on this canteen, and I copied some of the lettering from originals as well. And interestingly enough, as a reenactor, keeping these from leaking, you have to keep them full of water. So this is half full of water all the time. And when I go out to a reenactment, I'll dump this water out and add some more water because there's something else in the water so that it doesn't get moldy. A little rum. So I have rum mixed with the water so that it doesn't get moldy. Even today, we still do that. But at reenactments, obviously, I'm not going to drink water-filled rum.
Is it lined with anything?
It's lined, yes. It's lined with what's called brewer's pitch. It's kind of a combination of like a wax, a sap. You can see it a little bit on the plug. See that? So the whole inside is covered with that. I mean, you can even see how where it's not covered with that, it's getting a little moldy. But the inside is fine. The inside is fine. And usually about an ounce of rum to the half of the canteen.
That kills the germs.
Yep. 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 And you're going to wear that just like that over your left side. Right. Then you're going to carry your cartridge box. So here is a cartridge box, very similar, and I'm going to use this again when I show you what a regular Continental soldier would have used. Either a cartridge box or a powder horn and a shot pouch. Okay, so you have to have something. Typically, if you have a little bit of money to be able to afford a sword like this, you probably served in what they called the late war, which would have been the French and Indian War, and you probably have something left over. Cartridge box. So this is a cartridge box that's appropriate for the French and Indian War through about 1780. As you move into the late 1782, around that era, these cartridge boxes begin to change, and they start to look a lot more like, I think I tucked it away actually. They start to look a lot more like the cartridge boxes used in the War of 1812. So you're going to put that cartridge box on your right side, just like that. And everything's kind of back a little bit on your hips. Now, your backpack. Yes?
The blue check,
Okay, yep, this.
and it's in, you have a pocket, right?
That is correct. Yes, this is just a blue check wool. And if you can ask me that question again, were you asking what this is for? Okay. Can you ask me that again when I pick up my Fowler, which is my musket? Okay. And I'll try to remember to answer it. It'll make more sense then. Thank you, ma'am. This is a knapsack. This is based on a knapsack that was carried by a soldier named David Buell. The original knapsack is in the collection at, I believe it's at Washington's headquarters down in Newburgh. But David Buell was an officer with the Dutchess County Militia. So this is an exact copy of the knapsack that he would have carried. And inside, you'd have your cup, your plate, your utensils, and I'll show you some of those when we move on to a haversack. So you're going to strap on your knapsack, just like that. These straps here, just almost like a modern backpack. We're going to make it a little bit more comfortable if you're carrying heavy equipment and gear. So you're going to tie that on just like that. Right, we're not done yet. Now you need your blanket. So, here's your blanket. It's a wool blanket, and they call these check blankets, and each check mark here referred to, or point blanket. Each one of these points referred to the thickness. If you had a 3-point blanket, you were lucky, because this one's pretty thick and pretty warm. Standard issue would have been 2 points. I use 3 because I want to stay a little bit warmer when I'm at a reenactment. This is called the tump line. Again, hemp cord tied on a thick linen canvas strap, and you're going to sling that on top of your knapsack just like that. Now we're ready to go on campaign. You got bonus, little extra money if you could turn out with your own weapon. Yes, ma'am.
About that blanket, where would they be manufactured? In Canada or?
No, the Americans were making them. Some of them were being confiscated or stolen from the British. Sure. Anywhere we could get them. Because there's documentation of being well equipped, and we have documentation of them having no blankets as well. So anywhere they can get them, literally. This one closely resembles a British trade blanket, which a lot of these soldiers would have had in their civilian life, and they would have turned out with that as well. Okay? Now, if you can show up with your own hunting weapon, you're going to get a little bit extra money, because they don't have to supply you with one. So the hunting weapon that I have to show you is called a Fowler, and then I'll get to your question, ma'am. So this is an example of what's called a Fowler. It is a civilian hunting weapon. It was originally intended to hunt waterfowl, hence the name. It is a smoothbore. The caliber is 62 caliber, so you can shoot loose shot for like turkey or bird, or you can shoot a solid 62 caliber musket ball out of it. This one is based on an original that would have been an English style Fowler. This is called the lock, and many of you probably heard the expression lock, stock, and barrel, and if you have that, you have the whole package. That's where it comes from. It's very light. This one is very typical, again, of a middle kind of class. So you go to the gunsmith, you want your Fowler, well here it is. And as you notice, there's no fancy engraving or anything on this, and when I had this one reproduced for me, again, I wanted a middle class, kind of a working man or a soldier's weapon. But on the other side, it has a little bit of a serpent side plate, so that gives it a little bit of a decoration there. Right? And this in particular, I had it back on for you there. This one in particular does function. I actually take this turkey hunting, so oftentimes I'm asked at presentations or school programs, is that real? Well, is it real? Is it from the era? No. It is an authentic and functioning reproduction. So it is real in that regard. All right, now to your question, ma'am. What happens when you fire these is you have a reaction. When the gunpowder goes off, it's called fouling. And the powder essentially turns to mud. And the mud gets all over the pan and all down the barrel. And once you have too much fouling, guess what? This is not going to work anymore. So, take a few shots, maybe 2-3 shots. And you can clean it off with this. That's what it's for. And this one, you can even see, I used this in a reenactment recently, and it's even got some of the fouling on it from cleaning off the musket. So thank you for that question. Right? Now, the hat being turned off to the side. When you were ordered to fall in, you would fall in what's called the order, which is this position right here. Right? And again, I'm dressed as a civilian militia, very typical of a Rhinebeck resident that would have turned out for military service. And when they told you to shoulder your firelock, which is your musket or your fowler, excuse me, you drop your hand, bring it up, put it into your left hand, put your hand down at your side. Everybody know why my hat's turned to the side now? If not, it's going to hit my musket, just like that. So a soldier at arms, like this. Soldier falling in or at attention and at ease. Attention and ease. All right? So, again, a typical militia outfit. Any questions on the militia?
How much does that weapon weigh?
This one in particular is about 5.5 pounds. Good question. The military issue are significantly heavier. And this one in particular, what I want you to notice, and as we kind of shift gears a little bit and take a look at the regular soldier, hopefully you'll be able to notice some of the differences. The stock on this comes almost all the way to the muzzle, which means I cannot put a bayonet on the end. So this is very typical of a civilian arm. You have to have a sidearm when you fall out from militia duty. If I had room for bayonet, I would not have a sword. So this is my sidearm for this interpretation. Yes, sir.
You clean the pan
Yep.
of the residue.
Mhm.
How do you clean the barrel?
Good question. In my cartridge box, I forgot I had it on. When I take some of the gear off, I'll show you. Okay.
All right.
Any other questions? And I'll start kind of derobing here, and we'll take a look. I won't forget you.
All right.
Now, I noticed the design of the shoes
Mhm.
seem to have those buckles that are for opposite feet. Like, is that something that's more modern today, or you said the shoes were made to be
Yep.
duplicate?
The buckles you can flip on the underside of the buckle. They're both the same.
I see.
And then you just kind of flip them around. Yep. Yep. Correct. All right. Let's see if we can take some of this off, and I'll get to your question there, sir.
Easy to get tangled up in all the straps.
It is, and when you're lined up, I mean, you're going to have a person right on to your right and right to your left. And that's why everything has to be kind of tucked a little bit on your hip towards your backside. So if I turn this way, you can kind of see that a little bit better. So when my hands are at my side, I kind of block everything out of the way. You see that? So somebody could stand right next to me, shoulder to shoulder touching, and our gear should not clank together.
What's the weight you figure about everything?
Maybe 40 pounds. Yeah, 40 pounds. Believe it or not, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. You get used to it. You get used to it. And everybody cringes. Oh, you're wearing the wool in the summer. Wool's an amazing material. In the winter, it does keep you pretty warm. And in the summer, I mean, I'm not going to say you're comfortable, but it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
And food, and carrying food?
Food and everything's going to be in either your knapsack or your haversack. Soldiers typically would have been given a pound of meat a day, which sounds good, but half of it's gristle and bone, probably more than half of it. A field ration could be something like what's called a fire cake, which is just flour and water, kind of mixed together in a paste that would be thrown on a rock and cooked kind of next to the fire. And they'd make a lot of those ahead of time, and you'd be issued, here's your pound of meat and your fire cake. Here's your pound of meat, here's your fire cake. And then you're going to carry that on your person. Again, using documentation, one of the most famous soldiers to come out of the Revolution, Joseph Plum Martin, talks about they didn't have any food. And they're carrying around this cast iron pot that they're supposed to be cooking with. And they don't want to carry the pot anymore because it's useless. There's nothing to do with the pot. And it's amazing to think human nature is human nature. They're kids. He's 17, 18, 19 years old. And I don't know the exact age he was at the time of the story that I'll tell you. Even so, I'm 39, I would probably do this too. So you're carrying around the pot. I'm not carrying this pot anymore. You carry the pot. You carry the pot. I'm not carrying this pot. So what are you going to do with it? Well, we're walking along this path, and there's a cliff right there. You could leave it on the side, or you could throw it down the cliff and watch it bounce off things. That's kind of fun. Well, guess what? That's what they did. They throw the pot off the cliff. So they don't have any food. So it's interesting. All right. Okay. So the cartridge box question. Let me take this coat off here and I'll answer that. Inside of your cartridge box, you're going to carry some equipment to clean your musket. Typically, a militia soldier is not going to have a lot of the same cleaning equipment as a regular soldier. So what I'm going to show you, and I will because you asked the question, is more of something that a soldier in the regular Continental Army would have carried. So underneath the block of your cartridge box. So in here you're going to carry pre-made paper cartridges. An American cartridge box would carry 19 rounds, and most of the time you have 3 and not 19. But this box comes out. So that comes out. Underneath you have what's called a worm. That's called a worm. And on the end of my ramrod, and I'll show you on the regular musket how you would load and fire that. I won't shoot it inside, don't worry. There's a little spot there where you would screw it on the ramrod, and you would send this down the barrel with what's called tow. Tow is the extra from the flax that you use to produce your shirt, and you're going to send that down and basically swab the barrel with that. All right, so this is very important because this is how you're going to start your fire too. And you would carry just all that extra tow and your worm underneath your cartridge box, just like that. So thank you for that question, sir. What I'll talk briefly about is a rifleman, and we'll try and dismiss the myth that we won the revolution because we had rifles, and the British did not. Less than 10% of the Army's carrying rifles. Really one of the few decisive engagements where rifles played a significant role, and I know it's a big deal, but was Saratoga. When you look at the armies at Yorktown, the rifle does not play a role. Washington is trying to raise a professional army. Professional armies used muskets. Muskets were cheap and easy to produce. They were quick and easy to load. That's what you're going to equip your soldiers with. And you know, as we looked here at a hunting weapon of the New York area, it's a Fowler. It's a smooth bore. I don't know that there would have been any rifles even this far north. You're talking about Pennsylvania, you're talking about Virginia, where you start to see these German rifle makers begin to use that sort of rifling. The first rifled musket is the Civil War, before we're using a rifled musket effectively in combat. All right, so briefly rifleman, and then we'll look at a regular Continental soldier. Let me check the time here, I don't want to talk for too long. A little bit different, a rifleman would wear a hat like this, it's called a round hat. Sometimes would have been adorned with some feather or something of that nature just for decoration, so a little bit different. Of all the hats that I brought here today, this is by far the most comfortable and most practical. Those are stylish, this is practical because it's going to keep the sun out of your face, and you know, again, it's a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes riflemen would wear moccasins. So here's an example of moccasins. I always joke with my students that you know, moccasins they have, nope, those are slippers. These are real moccasins. And as by introduction there, thank you very much again. I was up at Ticonderoga during the battle on snowshoes. Believe it or not, I wore these with wool socks in the snow, and it was -5, and my feet were warm. So it's interesting. It's interesting. And you know, as a historian and as an interpreter, we have these, as I call them, aha moments, where something clicks. And what was interesting when I had these moccasins on, when I was on my snowshoes and we stopped moving, my feet started to get cold. And I thought, took my snowshoes off, put my feet in the snow, guess what? It got warmer. Snow's an insulator. So it's interesting. It's interesting. Sometimes riflemen might put these on the bottom of their shoes, or for that matter, a regular soldier, if you're lucky enough to have these made from a blacksmith. These are called ice creepers, but they're basically just crampons. Right? These would have been forged by a blacksmith. There are tons of these in the historic and the archaeological record. Tons of them. And they fit, I don't want to scratch your chairs, on the bottom just like that. Riflemen are what you're going to see carrying powder horns. So here's an example of a powder horn. Very, very useful. Waterproof. It's like the 18th century plastic. If your gunpowder gets wet, it's useless. This is waterproof. And it makes kind of a natural spout. And when you put it on, it even fits kind of nice, little bit of curve around your body, just like that. And typically soldiers would engrave or carve their powder horns So this one is engraved. This one I did some of the scrimshaw myself. But this is a real powder horn. When I go hunting, I fill this up with gunpowder, and it works. So it's kind of a neat thing. Back to the militia impression. Let's say you did not serve in the late war, and you didn't have a cartridge box. You're expected to have something to carry powder and something to carry shot. So that's where the powder horn might come in, even if you're not a rifleman. You know, and I often joke with my students, even in textbooks, believe it or not, you might see a Continental soldier wearing a regular dress, which we'll get to in a moment, walking around with a powder horn. It's not true. They didn't do that. All right. So, if you were carrying a powder horn, you need a shot pouch. This is an example of a shot pouch. It's just a little tiny linen bag. And in here, that's where you're going to keep your shot, your musket balls, and the powder is in there. Paper for rolling, maybe a cup. And we'll take a look in here. So here's an example of a cup and a spoon. It's not plastic. It's horn. It's horn. Okay, let's see here. And this is a little tinder box. So this is how you're going to start your fire. So inside, little tow, little flint and steel and char cloth. All right, so you hit those together. There you go. Start a fire.
But they didn't have matches?
No matches. Yeah, no. That's your match. I am not very good at starting fires with that, but I've done it a few times. There's some tricks to it. And the best trick is to use what's called char cloth. So you take a little tin box with a piece of linen, extra linen in it, put it in the fire, and let the box get nice and black. You got to poke a hole in the top. Take it out, and the trick is to take it out before it's too charred, and it turns to kind of dust, so just kind of blackened. And then once you get a little spark in there, it goes right up. Yeah. Okay, the coat of a rifleman. It's called a frock coat. And this one in particular is going to be very late war, into the War of 1812. And it has a lot of fringe on it for decorative purposes, but also practical. If you're out in the rain, instead of the water collecting on your shoulders or your arm, it's going to collect in the fringe, so it'll help keep you a little bit dry. And this is linen, And as you see the soldiers turning out, northern soldiers, mostly wool. Southern colonies, they're coming up with linen. Cotton exists, but it's expensive at this point because there is no cotton gin. So they do have cotton. It's expensive. So they're in the linen. Northerners are in the wool. All right. A few tomahawks. Start with this one. Tomahawk, hatchet, axe. Yes, somewhat interchangeable. This is more of an axe. 1 in 6 soldiers would have carried an axe like this. This is going to be for firewood, chopping firewood, building your shelter, and fighting if you have to. But another myth, did they throw their tomahawks? Everyone loves that question. I haven't found any evidence of that. That's a student question. They love that one. But I always say, think about it. Okay, there comes the enemy. Ah! I probably missed. Now they have my tomahawk and I don't. It is a much deadlier weapon in your hand than throwing it. So more of an axe or a hatchet that would have been used for those purposes. These are for fighting. So this is a spiked tomahawk. You're not splitting wood with that. This is based on an original that was excavated at Ticonderoga. More the French and Indian War period. Yes, some soldiers in the Revolution carried these, but really this is from the late war. So this is a weapon. This is not for splitting wood. And this is an example of a pipe tomahawk. Typical trade item with the Native Americans. This one here just has a little bit of pewter inlays. Bowl for smoking tobacco, the other side for fighting, and the smoke channel. And I actually made this one, so if you listen, so it works. And this is for cleaning. That comes out. Now I took the vacuum away, so it doesn't work, but that's for cleaning the bowl out from the tobacco. Plug that back in. And there you go. Okay. So let's shift over to a regular Continental soldier, and we'll relate this again back to Rhinebeck. The famous general coming out of Rhinebeck, as I'm sure you are aware, General Richard Montgomery, one of the first martyrs, and really one of the forgotten heroes of the Revolution. Everybody knows Obviously, people like Alexander Hamilton and George Washington. And another shocking thing I often tell my students, guess who we could not have won the American Revolution without? The best fighting general George Washington ever had. Thank you. There's the answer. It's true. Unfortunately, it's true. Benedict Arnold.
Well, Benedict.
But Richard Montgomery's forgotten. He really is, unfortunately. I know he's famous and we love him here in the Rhinebeck area, but he's really one of those forgotten heroes. So, to commemorate the great general, we need to fortify the Hudson Valley. The Hudson River being, as Washington even called it, the key to America. West Point doesn't exist yet, but we did have forts down near the Bear Mountain Bridge. And it was named Fort Montgomery, after Richard Montgomery. The soldiers stationed there were members of what was called the 5th New York Regiment. So New York at the time had 5 regiments that were raised. The 5th being in defense of the Hudson Valley, the 5th New York stationed at Fort Montgomery. So the clothing and gear that I'll put on now is military and of a soldier in the 5th New York stationed at Fort Montgomery. All right, first thing I'll put on, so I'm going to dress as a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant. This is just a sash, would have been kind of a silk linen blend. And you wear that around your waist to show your rank as a sergeant. So it's worn just like that. Now what you should notice is that I did not change my check shirt. I did not change my waistcoat because it is also appropriate for military dress. We have a lot of documents saying they're not giving out waistcoats. They want you to kind of show up with what you have, and then we'll piece together whatever you don't have. Most important is going to be your regimental coat. So that's to show rank, and it's worn on your waist just like that. This is a military cocked hat. So let me grab the civilian. And one thing that you can notice, it doesn't have the fantail. See that? It has what's called a cockade, which is a little bit of a ribbon there. And those are the two of the most obvious differences. And the other being the size. The military cocked hat is a little bit bigger. And you're going to wear that same way, just over your left eye, just like that. This is a regimental coat made out of wool. And again, this is military. This is strictly military. This is not a civilian coat. So if you allow me a moment to put that on. It's brown, faced blue. 5th New York wore brown coats. So before blue becomes the national color, and before blue becomes the standard towards the end of the war, each regiment in these local areas in New York or New Jersey, they had different colors. Why the 5th New York had stuck with brown was the only color left. So brown, faced blue. And what I want you to notice with this regimental coat are the buttons. It might be kind of hard to see from the back. But the buttons have an N and a Y, and so does the hat. And these are in the archaeological record as well. So how united really were we in 1777? Not as much so as you would think. Not as much so as you would think. There was literally a riot at Fort Ticonderoga in the winter of, I believe, 1775 to 1776, because the New England troops, they didn't like the Southern troops. What do I mean by Southern troops? New Yorkers. We were the Southern troops. We were referred to as the foul-mouthed Yorkers. We drank too much, got too rowdy, and didn't go to church on Sunday, so they don't want to associate with us. Kind of interesting. So how united really were we? Sure, we're fighting in the Continental Army. Yes, we do not like Great Britain, but don't forget, we are New Yorkers. You better not call me a New Englander. Did you see my buttons? And by the way, Mets and Yankees, first to be represented by an interlocking NY. Oh, you're looking at it. It's kind of interesting. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Do those hearts have any significance?
Just again, style. There were hearts on a lot of things. I'm trying to think here. When I put that belt on, there's a similar design. It was just kind of a design, if you will, or something that was fashionable at the time. And these are called turnbacks, actually. So when it's cold in the wintertime, you can drop it. Just like that. All right. However, yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you, what did they use to dye their cloth?
The brown, I don't know. But one thing I do know, for the madder red as opposed to scarlet, scarlet was expensive, and the color of the officer, because I believe you had to use a little beetle from South America. Okay? Madder red, I believe they used root. And I'm not sure what tree, to be honest with you. So all different kind of natural items for different dyes. different dyes. Yeah, for the brown and the blue, I'm not sure now. I'm sorry. All right. On my shoulder is a red epaulet, which also shows the rank of sergeant. Green corporal, and red would have been sergeant on your right shoulder, just like that. Okay.
When did they start using chevrons to determine rank?
Good question. After 1780, so when you start to see, let's say, after Yorktown, and we're waiting for the British to hopefully evacuate New York City, a lot of the soldiers stationed at the New Windsor Cantonment down near West Point, down near Newburgh, they would have started to have those chevrons of service on their arms, and they would have been blue coats. By then, we had accepted blue as kind of the national color. And you even see that, War of 1812, blue. Civil War, blue. Mexican-American War before the Civil War, blue. Even the Spanish-American War, take a look at Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, they weren't blue shirts. It's really into World War I where we start to think, well, wait a minute, maybe let's try, I don't want to say camouflage, but they go to that olive drab, but the still official dress is still blue. So it's interesting. So this here, this is a shoulder belt. Notice it's not fancy. This is military issue. And you're going to wear that on your left side. This one, a little bit less of a heart pattern, but sometimes it would have had a little bit of a heart shape there as well, a little bit of decoration. Two weapons in here. One is the bayonet, which we'll talk about in a second, and the second is a hanger. It's not referred to as a sword. And what you can notice with this, it's a lot different than that fancy civilian one. This is a military weapon. It's called a hanger, hangs at my side. Sword would have been a very generic term. That's like saying gun. Well, what's a gun? Is it a musket or is it a rifle? Is it a cannon? That would have made no sense. Is it a fowler? Sword is very generic. It's a hanger. Again, it's not sharp. It would have been used as a blunt instrument. Really not even for stabbing. So, you're going to carry this as a symbol of your rank as a sergeant. Sergeant Corporal, you're allowed to have swords. And typically they're going to kind of plain like this. If you are a private, no sword. And you're going to wear that right on your side, just like that. Okay. And you have your haversack. So, in this case, no knapsack. But here's my haversack. So I'll put that on, and when I start to take some of these garments off again, we'll take a look inside. So you're going to wear that. Also on your left side. Just like that. Canteen. A little different. This one's tin. It's a tin canteen with a hemp strap. And that also goes on your left side. Just like that. And then lastly, again, very similar to the civilian cartridge box here, an early war cartridge box. And you're going to wear that on the right side. And that goes on last. And then your military cocked hat, and then of course your musket. So let's take a look at the musket.
What's the difference between a musket and a rifle?
Okay, very good question. Thank you, sir. Muskets, Fowlers are smooth bore. So inside the bore, it's smooth. Rifles have grooves which give the projectile a spin, which make them more accurate. But it takes almost twice as long to load. It takes twice, and they're very expensive to produce. And I always like to say, our forefathers were not stupid. They were not stupid. I'm sure you've heard it. They stood in lines. That's stupid. They fired in volleys. That's stupid. They got close to each other. That's stupid. It's not. Weapons dictate tactics. Muskets are cheap and easy to produce. How do you use a musket effectively? Here's an analogy I always like to give. If I'm standing here and I was a track athlete, I didn't play baseball, and you said to me, Neil, here's a baseball, can you hit that picture right there on the wall? Well, sure. You're going to hold the baseball like this. I'm righty. I'm going to hold it in my right hand. I'm going to take a step. What do? Give it a spin. Boom. That's a rifle. But that's expensive. We just can't outfit soldiers with enough rifles. Tactics have not developed to use rifles yet. It's not effective. Well, what's a musket? Oh, Neil, here's what I want you to do. You're righty. Now you have to hold that baseball in your left hand. And you can't hold it like this. You have to hold it like that. Now I want you to hit that. Well, now you step and you look a little funny. It's not going to go very far, and you're probably going to miss. That's a musket. Why would we use those? Here's why. First, we need to get close. Okay? Effective range on this, less than 100 yards. Less than 100 yards. If you were at the other end of a football field and I took a shot at you, the musket ball would probably roll up against your feet. You have to get close. Secondly, take that baseball scenario again. I'm standing here by myself. I am going to miss. But what happens if I line up 20 of you right next to each other, and everybody has to use their left hand, and you can't hold it like this, everybody's holding it like this, and I say, ready, set, throw. Boom! How many are going to hit that thing now? 5, 10 maybe? You just made that weapon effective, right? So that's the difference. We did not have a production musket of our own until 1795, which means we are using whatever we can get. This one is British, so it would have been a leftover from the French and Indian War. The French sent us muskets. You saw an American-made civilian arm. We don't have the technology to produce military arms like this. This is heavier, kind of clunkier, and you can use the bayonet on the end. Now the way these work, they're what's called a flintlock. This is just a piece of flint. And believe it or not, this rock is harder than the metal. It's harder than the metal. And everything's done on command. Because the only difference between an army and an armed mob is discipline. You do what you're told when you are told to do it. And that includes firing your musket. If you're caught firing your musket when you are not supposed to, you are in some serious trouble. Everything's on command. So the command would be handle cartridge. You would reach into your cartridge box and then pull out a pre-made paper cartridge. And believe it or not, even though it's gunpowder, stick it next to your face like this. They would tell you to prime your pan. Stick that paper in your mouth, rip it, pour a little bit in the pan. That's the prime. Put it back here. Shot pan, pinky. Cast about. Put your musket down at your side. Charge cartridge. Pour the cartridge down in the musket ball. These are muzzle loaders. Withdraw your rammer. Ram down your cartridge. Withdraw your rammer. Return your rammer. Shoulder your fire lock. 1, 2. Now you're ready to fire. And you would be expected to get at least 3 shots off in a minute doing that. 3 shots. I don't know if that's real, but 2 definitely. A rifle, you're getting 1 shot off, maybe. Now the way these work, they would tell you to make ready in front of your face, present like a ballerina, and fire. Now what I want you to watch, this is not going to go off, don't worry, is the sparks. So when I pull the trigger, this rock is going to hit this, which is called a prism. It's going to send sparks down into the pan where you poured that little prime. That ignites, and then there's a little what's called a touch hole, a little tiny hole that goes into the barrel that ignites the rest of the charge. See the sparks? And then boom. Now when you shoot these for real, again, this is a functioning musket. I've shot real musket balls out of it. And I'm also an avid hunter. It's amazing the delay. It's a split second, but it feels like it. If you shoot a modern firearm, boom, and then you move like this, that shot is already gone. Okay, it's already gone. You do that with this, that's where your shot's going. Okay, because there's an explosion here, and then boom, another delay. Now, what's kind of interesting as well, what is your weapon of choice? Loud, mean, nope, ineffective, believe it or not. Temperamental, what if it's raining? What if it's humid? It's not going to go off. Well, you got your sword. Nope. This never fails. On the end of your musket, now you have a 7-foot long spear. Why would you want to use this? This is better, right? And if you notice, the shape of the bayonet, what can you do with this on? You can still shoot it. Correct. You can still shoot it. When you look at some of the engagements of the American Revolution, the light infantry assault on the redoubts at Yorktown, they didn't even give them ammunition. Just this. That's it. When Anthony Wayne assaults Stony Point coming out of West Point, no ammunition. Just this. I always ask the question, well, why? Why did they give it to him? All it takes is that one guy that's got a couple of screws loose, gets a little trigger happy, boom, shoots his musket, guess what? Now they not only know you're coming, they know where you are, because you just sent fire out the muzzle and the lock of your musket. They didn't even give it to him. That's the most effective tool, believe it or not. Now the light infantry, they would wear a helmet that's a little bit different. This is a light infantry helmet. It's just leather. It's just leather. I don't know why they called it a helmet. It's not going to stop a bullet or anything like that. But this would have been worn by light infantry troops. So, to give you an example of that. Okay. Last thing I have, it looks like I forgot to show you. is really the only thing that's disposable in the 18th century is your clay pipe. These are all over in the archaeological record. I mean, you can buy an original for like $30, believe it or not. But these would have been used for smoking tobacco. Sometimes they would have tucked them inside of their hat, so you don't get it lost. Just like that. Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask any questions. If there's something that you saw this evening that you'd like to know a little bit more about, how we doing on time? We're okay? Please ask. I'm going to, if you don't mind, take some of this off because I'm starting to get a little hot. Sir?
One of the things is on a rifle is that they're individually made.
Correct.
If you lost the part, it was a club.
Very good observation, sir. Muskets did have, to an extent, interchangeable parts. Fowlers and rifles were individually made. Everyone is different. Correct. Which hence why they're so expensive. You think of anything that's custom made today, it's more money. Same idea. Other questions? Yes, sir.
How did the recoil compare on the?
Good question. Thank you. Believe it or not, the kick or recoil on these not that bad. And the reason why is because it's so heavy. You know, if you shoot a modern shotgun or something of that nature, typically they're very light, and that's why they have such a kick, or a handgun with a very big kick. It's because they're so light. That weighs, with the bayonet on, over 10 pounds. So, I mean, it does have an interesting crack to it, but the kick is not bad. And the other thing that's interesting is the direction of the kick. Modern firearms have a kick, usually that's straight back. These, the kick comes from the muzzle. They go kind of up, but it's not bad at all because of the weight.
You were going to show us what's in that bag.
Yes, I was. Thank you. See that? It's been a long day. Okay. Inside. Let's see here. In the haversack. Okay. So, wooden bowl. Tin cup. That's it. And these are all based on originals. This cup is based on one that was excavated at Fort Ligonier. And then your utensils. So pewter spoon. Those would have been cast pewter. This one's a copy of the spoons they found in Fort Montgomery. Fork. Just two-tine fork. Again, this is a copy of one that was excavated at Fort Montgomery. So you have two tines and then a bone handle. And then your jackknife. So there you go. And believe it or not, this is a copy of a French knife. We have documentation of French knives being used by the soldiers at Fort Montgomery. So this is a copy of that. And this one in particular was made by a blacksmith that's up in Maine. So this was hand forged, and the wood was all hand carved and hand stamped. And the gentleman that made it even used original brass kettle. So that's original brass on that pocket knife there. Right, it's very sharp. It's very sharp. And that's that with your fire cakes and your beef. That's what you're going to have in your haversack.
Now, what made a person a good soldier? Like, you're talking about civilians who are farmers and...
Good question. Yep.
I mean, what would...
Do what you're told makes a good soldier.
were
Question
Americans
nothing.
good at that?
The militia, believe it or not so much. They were very noted for running away, taking a shot, taking two shots, and withdrawing, because they are just that. They're farmers. You know, as you kind of look at the different uniforms, the 5th New York, we know they stood. And it's pretty amazing, the Battle of Fort Montgomery. You have 2,000 British soldiers coming. You have about 600 men to defend the forts. You are going to lose. They stay. They stay. The militia would have been out of there if given the chance. And we do know that there was some militia that was stationed there. And then it becomes, how do you use the militia? At the Battle of Cowpens, Daniel Morgan uses them brilliantly. Because he goes around to each of the militia regiments before the battle and says, listen, I know you want to get out of here. I know you're not a professional soldier. Here's what I need you to do. Can you take 2 shots? We can do that, sir. Then you can run away. So the militia take 2 shots. They run away. A ruthless cavalry commander sees the militia running away and thinks that he has them in retreat. His name is Bannister Talton, and his nickname, by the way, was Bloody Ban. And he begins to pursue the militia. But behind the militia, as they're running away and he thinks he's winning, well, guess what? There's Morgan's regulars. And there you go. And you have this victory at the hands of Morgan because he uses the militia for what he knew they could do, and all that really you could expect them to do. You know, and even as you look at some of our great achievements in World War I, World War II, amazing thing about Americans, well, who are these people? Doing these unbelievable and great things. They're citizens. You're taking somebody from a high school classroom, and now all of a sudden they're in the Battle of the Bulge, and they're doing these amazing things. So that idea of a citizen soldier really is the case as far back as the Revolution. Even these guys in the Continental Army, what were they? Some of them did become professionals, but we were not yet a professional army. So how did he use the militia? It's kind of a brilliant way. Do what we know you can, and then you can withdraw. And that was kind of a smart move.
Other questions?
Money? Salary? I mean, were they paid to do this stuff?
That's an interesting question. They were supposed to be paid. A lot of them were not. We have accounts of Washington paying them out of his own pocket. And, you know, we tend to forget another kind of dark side of the Revolution is a lot of the mutinies that Washington had to deal with because his men were not being paid. So what do? He sympathizes with them. He agrees with them. You can't have a mutiny. You know, so there are accounts of Washington ordering men to be shot, hung, for mutiny. You know, and one of the hallmarks of his leadership is his ability to do a number of things, including listen to his subordinates. But his character is unmatched, really, as you look at some of these revolutionary leaders. And, you know, I read an account where who's going to be the new leader of this new country we're creating? It has to be Washington, in whatever form that's going to be. So he deals with one mutiny, hanging. Deals with another mutiny, shooting. The most dangerous mutiny of all at New Windsor, at the New Windsor Cantonment, he makes a speech. So here you have battle-hardened men that haven't been paid. They're ready to march out of there and go down to Philadelphia and demand the money. What does Washington do now? He's going to shoot all of these guys that are, I mean, we're talking about high-ranking officers. That's not what he does. He comes in and he makes a speech. And he says to the men gathered there, excuse me, well, I pulled my spectacles out of my pocket. Not only have I grown old and gray in service to my country, I've grown blind. Now these guys that were ready to mutiny are crying. That's it. So it's interesting. So did they get paid? Yes, but not really. You know, then you have the pension reports where soldiers are applying for pensions well into the 1800s. You know, what we couldn't give them in money, you were given in land. But they're not giving you land anywhere in New York City. You're talking about out in the frontier. Yeah, go get your land out there, way, way, way out. And don't worry about the Native Americans. They're going to welcome you. Well, no. A lot of these guys didn't even go to their land that they were supposedly given. So, you know, plenty of accounts of soldiers who were supposed to be paid get nothing and end up poor.
Where would the money have come from?
Very good question, and therein lies the problem. Yeah.
Because they weren't taxed at that.
Correct. We had nothing. You know, a lot of the money coming from France, coming from the Dutch. You know, we tend to forget about the Dutch. We sent John Adams over to talk to the Dutch. So that money that's coming in, that's a lot of what we used it for, was to pay the soldiers. So don't worry, it's coming. We're getting the money from France. Oh, well, it's not here. You want to go home, see it. Okay.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that.